Welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today we're tackling something that's really been making waves online, especially on places like TikTok.
Yeah, the Tartaria theory.
Exactly. It's this, well, fascinating idea claiming there was this huge, technologically advanced ancient civilization.
And that its history was somehow wiped away, leaving clues hidden in plain sight, particularly in architecture.
Right. And to really get a handle on what this theory is and maybe why it's caught on, we've gathered a stack of sources you've shared with us.
We got a bunch of those viral TikTok videos, where lots of people first bump into these ideas.
And then we have two YouTube videos that give some crucial background. One looks at the historical use of the name Tartaria on old maps.
And the other one dives deep into the architectural arguments proponents use, focusing especially on things like the Chicago World's Fair buildings.
So our mission today is pretty clear. Lay out the main claims you see online about Tartaria.
Then contrast that with what the historical and architectural sources tell us.
And finally, try to figure out why this whole idea seems to resonate so much with people right now.
Yeah, understand the appeal.
Get ready then. We're going to be navigating through, well, viral claims, maps from centuries ago, grand but maybe temporary buildings, and this enduring human interest in lost histories and hidden knowledge.
Okay, let's unpack this.
All right, so where do most people first encounter this? Probably TikTok, right? Those short, really visual videos.
Definitely. They often show, dramatic shots or old photos of these incredibly grand, ornate buildings, sometimes historical sites, sometimes things presented as lost technology.
And the hashtags they use really tell a story on their own. You've got the obvious ones, hashtag Tartaria, hashtag Tartarian Empire, hashtag Tartarian architecture.
Hashtag Tartarian technology, hashtag old world. Those point right at the main subject.
But then you see others that sort of build out the world, like hashtag ancient civilizations, hashtag ancient technology.
Implying it wasn't just different, but way more advanced than the history we know.
And what's really interesting is how they suggest that technology might have worked. You see tags like hashtag sound, hashtag frequency, hashtag vibration, hashtag vibes, even hashtag bells.
Yeah, it hints at this idea of maybe free energy or some kind of resonant technology powering everything. It's quite sci-fi, almost.
And the theory uses specific ideas to explain odd things you might see, like hashtag mud flood.
Yes, the mud flood. This idea that some huge catastrophe, literally a flood of mud, buried the original ground floors of old buildings.
So those windows you see at street level in some old buildings.
The theory says those are actually basement or first floor windows, and the real ground level is now buried. It's a key visual proof people point to.
And then there's hashtag reset. That suggests an even bigger event, maybe, that didn't just destroy the civilization, but also wiped our memory of it.
Allowing a, let's say, less impressive version of history to be written in its place.
Some versions even bring in other common themes from these kinds of theories. Hashtag giants, for instance.
Right, suggesting the huge scale of some doorways or buildings means they were built for giants.
And hashtag Antarctica secrets, linking Tartaria to other ideas about hidden continents or suppressed knowledge.
And underlying all of this is a really strong theme of question everything.
Yeah, and the claim that they, some unnamed power, erased the real history to control us.
You hear phrases like, founded, not built by us, applied to grand structures.
Or assertions of 100% proof of this advanced civilization just based on, say, large stonework.
So putting the viral claims together, it's this picture of a global, technologically advanced empire called Tartaria,
deliberately erased by shadowy forces.
with the main evidence being grand architecture found all over the world that seems, well, unexplained by standard history. It's a compelling story, especially with the visuals.
Okay, so that's the online version, the one spreading virally. But what about the name Tartaria itself? What do our sources say about its appearance on old maps? Was that real?
Oh, absolutely. That's where things get really interesting, because the sources confirm Tartaria, or Tartary, was the real term on maps for centuries. We're talking 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, even earlier. It wasn't just invented recently.
So it shows up on old maps. Where? What did it represent?
It usually depicted this huge, often vaguely defined region in Asia, sometimes stretching from the Caspian Sea almost to the Pacific, and from Siberia down towards the Himalayas. It was vast.
And where did the name come from?
It originated with the Tatar people, for the Mongolian plateau. But after the Mongol Empire exploded onto the scene in the 13th century, Europeans started associating the name Tatar with the Mongols more broadly.
And the European view of them, it shifted, didn't it?
It really did. Initially, there were maybe some hopes they could be allies, the whole Prester John legend thing. They were sometimes called Tatars. Then came the stories of the Mongol invasions, the brutality. And Europeans started linking the name to Tartarus the Abyss from Greek mythology, basically their version of hell.
Ah, so Tatar became Tartar because it sounded like Tartarus, linking them to something hellish.
Exactly, and that association stuck.
So the sources emphasize this was mainly a European label.
Crucially, yes. It was a European cartographic term for a vast area they didn't fully understand, full of diverse peoples, Turkic groups, Mongols, various nomadic tribes. It wasn't a single unified empire calling itself Tartaria.
Not like the conspiracy theory suggests.
Not at all. It was more of a catch-all term for lands east of Russia and north of India and Persia, excluding China. As European knowledge improved, they started dividing it up on maps. Great Tartary, Little Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Independent Tartary.
Trying to get more specific.
Right. And the term eventually faded from maps by the mid-19th century. Not because of a cover-up, the sources say, but because exploration brought better, more accurate geographic names.
So historical Tartaria on maps,
Yeah.
real term, but represented European understanding and misunderstanding of a diverse region, not a lost global super civilization.
Precisely. And it's interesting how things like, say, a declassified CIA document mentioning Soviet suppression of Tatar ethnic history gets pulled into the theory and misinterpreted as evidence for erasing this Grand Tartarian Empire. It's a conflation.
Okay, so the name's history is different, but what about the buildings? That's such a huge part of the theory, these grand structures that seem too advanced or too out of place. The Chicago World's Fair of 1893 comes up constantly.
Yes, the Columbian Exposition. People see photos of the White City, these monumental classical buildings, and the argument is, how could these be temporary? They look so permanent, and why tear them down? Some even tie the scale to the #giants idea.
This is where the architectural analysis in our sources really helps. Those Chicago Fair buildings were stunning, monumental scale, classical Beaux-Arts style, looked like ancient Rome popped up in Chicago.
But the key thing the source explains is that they were designed to be temporary, just for the 6 months of the fair in 1893.
Okay, but how do they build something so impressive so fast? Lost tech.
Not lost tech, according to the source, but clever use of contemporary materials and tech. The main material wasn't solid stone,
No. What was it?
mostly cast plaster, sometimes called staff, which was basically plaster mixed with fibers for strength. This was applied over relatively simple frames of wood and steel.
Ah, so they could mold intricate designs easily.
Exactly. They could mass-produce ornaments using molds,
Yeah.
hang them on the framework, and cover huge areas quickly and cheaply compared to carving marble or granite. It looked like stone, but it was essentially a very elaborate stage set.
Wow, okay. That makes sense for speed.
And they use other tech too, like the pneumatic paint sprayer, fairly new then, to quickly paint everything white, giving it that famous white city look.
What about the cost and the scale? It was huge, right?
Immense.
Yeah.
690 acres. It cost about $19 million back then, which is, yeah, nearly $600 million today. But the source puts it in context. It was a massive international event, meant to impress over 27 million visitors. Think about the billions spent on modern Olympics for its time. The cost, while huge, was in line with the ambition.
And the whole point was spectacle.
A temporary spectacle, a fantasy city, a kind of theme park designed to offer a vision of urban beauty, a stark contrast to the dirty industrial cities many visitors knew. It was meant to inspire, but be fleeting.
And they really did just tear them down afterwards.
The sources confirm, yes, deliberately demolished. They served their purpose for the fair and were never intended to be permanent structures.
Okay, but that temporary vision, it had a real impact, didn't it? It led to something called the City Beautiful movement.
That's right. The fair's aesthetic directly inspired City Beautiful. The goal was to bring that same feeling, the grandeur, the order, the classical beauty, into permanent city planning across America.
So building real cities that look like the fair. Wide avenues, big Beaux-Arts buildings, plazas, fountains.
Exactly. Trying to remake American cities in that image.
Seems kind of nice, aiming for beauty. But the source we have is critical of it.
It offers a significant critique, yeah. First, achieving that vision often require massive demolition of existing neighborhoods. The source points to the Benjamin Franklin Parkway in Philadelphia, a classic City Beautiful project where something like 1,500 homes were cleared to create that grand boulevard.
Wow. So erasing the old to make way for this specific vision of new.
And the source argues this top-down planning often destroyed the, organic human-scale character of older neighborhoods that grew over time. It felt imposed.
And the style itself, Beaux-Arts, where did that come from?
Well, the source points out it borrowed heavily from the redesign of Paris under Napoleon III, carried out by Baron Haussmann.
Husband's Paris, wide boulevards.
Right. And part of the reason for those wide boulevards, famously, was strategic, harder for protesters to build barricades, easier for troops to move. So the source suggests this aesthetic, while beautiful, had historical links to state control and managing populations.
So the beauty was maybe a tool.
Some critics at the time apparently saw the City Beautiful movement as almost an architectural cult, trying to impose order and discipline through design.
Which leads to what one source called a tragic irony.
Exactly. The irony being that the very buildings the Tartaria theory often holds up as evidence of a lost, maybe freer civilization. The World's Fair buildings, the City Beautiful projects are, in this historical interpretation, the ones that often replaced older cityscapes and used an architectural style historically associated with control, not necessarily liberation.
So when we step back and look at the sources, we get these historical explanations for the name on the map, for the grand architecture. Yet the Tartaria theory itself is clearly powerful for a lot of people. Why do you think it resonates like that?
Well, the sources suggest it taps into some really fundamental things. There's always been a fascination with lost civilizations, right? Ancient high technology, it just grabs the imagination.
Yeah, Atlantis, El Dorado. It's a
Yeah.
recurring theme.
And it definitely connects with a sense of loss, maybe even resentment that people feel when they see significant old buildings torn down or when cities change in ways that feel forced or disregard history. That feeling of being burned by progress or feeling outside the system making decisions.
It makes you think about how fragile things are, maybe. Like that grand old building seems permanent, but maybe it isn't.
Exactly. That feeling that the things we value about our places can be easily erased.
And like a lot of these online theories, it plays into that suspicion, that fear, that there are hidden powers manipulating history, controlling what we're told.
Yeah, the they who are hiding the truth. The sources point out it works like many internet theories, finds compelling images, often removed from context, and weaves them into a narrative that just feels right visually.
And connects to other existing theories sometimes.
The sources mention specific figures like Levashov or Fomenko, known for ideas about erased Russian history or faked chronologies, showing how these concepts can blend and borrow from each other.
So whether you accept the standard history or the Tartaria theory, it pushes you to think about architecture, permanence, change.
Absolutely. What's the difference between style and substance? Beauty versus authenticity. Who decides what our cities look like? What history gets preserved?
So wrapping up this deep dive, we started with those really visual, compelling online claims about Tartaria, the lost empire, the hidden tech.
Then we looked at the historical maps, seeing Tartaria as a real but evolving European label for a vast region, not a single empire.
And we dug into the architecture, particularly the Chicago World's Fair, understanding how temporary plaster buildings could look so grand and how the City Beautiful movement it inspired had its own complex history involving demolition and a style linked to control.
Yeah, it really underscores how important it is to look at different sources, different perspectives when you encounter these really big historical claims. The sources here offer explanations grounded in geography, technology of the time, and urban planning history.
Which contrasts pretty sharply with the viral theory.
Right. But it's also crucial to acknowledge the feelings the theory taps into. That sense of loss about the past, the urge to question official stories, the simple appreciation for amazing old buildings, those feelings are real and understandable.
Even at the specific claims about a global Tartarian empire are viewed by historians and architectural experts as misinterpretations,
Exactly.
which kind of leaves us and you with a final thought to chew on. Think about how cities and towns are still changing today. Do you see old buildings vanish? Do new developments sometimes feel imposed, like they're erasing something valuable? What does the appeal of a theory like Tartaria, mixing history, architecture, suspicion, tell us about how we relate to our past, our surroundings, and the stories we believe in an age flooded with information and, well, misinformation?
What questions does this deep dive into Tartaria leave you thinking about, looking at the world around you?